Hey everyone, and welcome to the Actual Fluency podcast. This is the podcast where I interview amazing language learners, industry experts, or just around cool people that have anything to do with language learning or traveling or anything of that sort. So today I'm happy to be talking to my friend Lukas van Vyve, who's a Belgian polyglot who's been doing some really good work with language challenges lately, where he's been taking people through a 12-month not 12-month, 12-week program that's really been doing wonders for people's skills. He's using some of his own experiences over many years learning languages, some of the I guess you can call it like the non-obvious wisdom or something that's contrary to what we're all usually taught in language school. And he talks about that and his own experiences learning languages. And we get into a really nice practical episode, which for some reason I always like doing those. I know that some people might be sick of hearing about how to learn languages or tips and tricks, but to me, that's like the most fun thing to do. Of course, it's also nice and interesting to hear where people have come from, what they're doing, what they're using their languages for. But I just a good discussion on the methods and techniques for me is really interesting. Um, Before I let loose on the recording with Lukas, you can find more about these language challenges and what Lukas is up to on actualfluency.com/Lukas. I just put a few information there. That's Lukas with a K, Lukas. So if you're more interested after listening to Lukas and his methods, go there and I'll be sure to add the information to that page. But just 1 second before we get started, I just wanted to thank Glossika for supporting and sponsoring this season of the show. Without them, I'm not entirely sure how many episodes I will be able to produce. And I really appreciate them. Not, I mean, the financial incentive is good as well. Don't get me wrong. It's nice to be podcasting and getting a little bit of a return, a little bit of beer money here and there. But what feels really good is the support that they're actually showing. They're showing an interest in what actual fluency stands for, and they also believe that I can provide them value in return. And you guys can come and try and check Glossika out and see what they're up to. So if you haven't seen Glossika before, I'd recommend you go to tryglossika.com to get a free tester, see what they're up to. And if you do want to join, they have I think there's over 50 languages now that you can learn. And the cool thing is you can even learn in different combinations. So you can learn from different languages to different languages instead of just from English or whatever you're used to learning from. It's mainly audio courses where you focus on a core number of sentences that you sort of repeat on a spaced repetition system, and then you have lots of tools and games almost to interact with this basic kind of syllabus. So if you do want to give Glossika a try, go to tryglossika.com, as I said, and otherwise have a fantastic day and enjoy this interview with Lukas van Vyve.
A blooper episode.
Yeah, well, I should have done that actually. Yeah, why didn't I do that?
You can do that, yeah. Just tell me, Lucas,
No,
the floor is yours. 30 minutes.
yeah. But anyway, Lucas, enough stalling.
And
Yeah,
that's
I know you're stalling. Yeah, tell the people who you are, where you're from, and what you're working on at the moment.
Okay, so I'm Lucas, 25 years old. I'm from Belgium, from the northern part, from Antwerp. So my mother tongue is Dutch or Flemish. And over the past few years, I've learned quite a lot of languages, not as many as some of the other guests on this podcast, but I've learned English, German, French, Italian, some Spanish. Recently started dabbling into Chinese. These are the main languages I'm working on right now. I work as a translator. I also have a website called The Polyglot Life, and I run some language courses on there for German, French, Spanish, and Italian.
Awesome. So a little bit of everything there. So where did this language craze start? I mean, is it a byproduct of being Belgium? Obviously, we're quite used to hearing about the natural polyglots of Belgium and Brussels. Was that a big part of it?
So this is quite a misconception people have about Belgium, actually. They all think, either they think everyone speaks French, if they don't know anything about Belgium. If they do, then they think, okay, so everyone is bilingual, which is not the case at all. So it's actually very divided. I'm from Antwerp in the north, we never use French. We learn it
Oh,
at school,
really?
learning it at the age of 10 at school. But if you go to Antwerp, I mean, people can help you in French probably, but it's not really something that most people use on a regular basis. You can't even go like to a government agency and get help in French in Flanders.
Okay.
But we start learning at the age of 10, and that's where my language learning journey started. At the age of 10. And actually, I like languages from a young age. I think at the age of 11, if people asked me what I wanted to become later on in life, I always said that I wanted to become an interpreter. And I don't really remember why, but I remember I loved learning languages and wanted to be able to speak a lot of them. So yeah, that's when it all started for me actually. And then when I went to high school, we had some, like some French classes, English classes, a bit of German as well. Dabbled a little bit into Spanish, but I didn't do that much outside of I mean, I love languages, but I didn't do that much outside of high school, of normal classes. But then afterwards, I decided I wanted to still become an interpreter when I was 18. So I went to university, started studying applied linguistics, English, German, and Dutch. I went to Edinburgh on an exchange year. And that's really when the traveling bug caught me as well when I was in Edinburgh. I felt like, okay, I want to live abroad. It's amazing that you can actually use your languages there, because when you're all learning them, like at university, you're not really using them that often with native speakers. So that was really nice. Got a Spanish girlfriend actually in Edinburgh. So I started learning some Spanish again.
Of
That
course.
worked quite well. For the duration of the relationship, I learned quite some Spanish. Forgot it all afterwards. Yeah, so that's what I did up to when I was 21 or 22, I think. Then I finished my bachelor's in applied linguistics, started a master's in interpretation. So I was getting really close to my goal of becoming an interpreter. Finished that master's, but then all of a sudden I didn't feel like becoming an interpreter anymore. So I moved abroad again. Started studying another master's in international politics. And that was actually quite interesting because it was a trilingual master's. It was in the south of France and in Berlin. And all our classes and all our lectures were in German, French, or English. So it would depend on the topic. So we would, for example, have international relations in English, then economics would be in French, something like federalism or public policy would be also in French,
Wow.
history in German, which is really cool because we were in a group of people who were not, it was not a language course, but still all people there were trilingual. And we could all speak these languages up to quite a high level because it's very specialized, to have these lectures, university, like academic stuff in all these languages. It was really, really interesting for me to see that. Very applied as well, That was great. And then after I graduated there, I still didn't feel like coming back to Belgium. I didn't want to start a 9-to-5 job. So I decided to move to Italy, become a freelancer, work as an interpreter, translator, sorry, not an interpreter. And that's also when I started, my language company, because after all this experience living abroad and learning languages, both at university and high school, but also by myself, I really had quite a lot of frustrations about like the traditional ways of language learning. Found that there were much better ways of learning a language, much easier, as many of the polyglots on your podcast have told your audience probably already. So I decided to write some guest posts as well on language learning. Started teaching some language strategy workshops on like my own method, more or less, of language learning. And yeah, recently I also started with language courses for German, French, Spanish, and Italian. I follow my own methodology, what I call the Effortless Conversations method for language learning. So that's basically my whole story up to today with language learning.
That's super cool. I mean, that's very. It seems very guided in a way. But one question I had immediately was, what was it about the interpreting that suddenly made you decide not to want to do it? Do you remember? What was it? Just like, it seems kind of strange to go from like 12 years of I want to do something, and then you get there and you're like, nah, I can't be asked anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. It was more, I think, that when I was, so what I did was I did a master's of interpretation, but that's not enough because I wanted to become a conference interpreter. So I didn't want to, I really wanted to work at European Parliament, for example, or the United Nations, although that's not possible if your mother tongue is Dutch. But anyway, I wanted to work at these institutions. But to do that, you have to do a master's in interpretation, and then you have to do another postgraduate. So it was another year that I had to stay. And I was just a little bit fed up with being in Belgium and studying at university. And I mean, these courses and the master's was pretty challenging. It's actually quite difficult, and it's also good for public speaking and to practice your target languages as well. but I felt that I wasn't really ready at that point to do like the postgraduate and then start working in Belgium. I wanted to travel first. I wanted maybe to learn another language. So that's why I decided to move abroad first. And actually, my goal was to, or my initial idea was to move abroad for 1 year, do this extra master's in international relations, which would also help me with my conference interpretation career afterwards. But yeah, then after being abroad for a year, it was like, do I really want to go back to university in Antwerp, back to my hometown, study there for another year, and then maybe work as a conference interpreter? Because most people that I know that actually did that postgraduate, they didn't even get in European institutions.
Right.
Because it's really, really difficult. Yeah, and then I decided, well, I want more freedom. I want to move abroad again. I want to learn Italian. And I decided to go for that and give that a go and see if I could help other people with learning languages while traveling, while having a lot of freedom, while working, online.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically more, I think, the freedom and the ability to travel that lured me away from a career in the institutions.
Right. Well, why can't Dutch native speakers be interpreters in the UN?
Oh, you could technically, but you have to be really, really proficient in one of the official languages. So Dutch is not an official language at the UN.
Okay.
And normally, as a simultaneous conference interpreter, you would only work into your mother tongue because it's very, very. Some people can do it into another language, but normally you always work from English, from German, from these languages into your mother tongue.
I see. Okay.
And that's, you can't do that there. Maybe some people can, but it's quite difficult. As a translator, you can work for them, I think, but as an interpreter, it's quite difficult.
Right. The traveling is really a thing I find that is quite well connected to, if you're interested in learning languages and improving yourself that way. I feel like most people are also quite keen travelers. So maybe there's a correlation there that if you have a desire to broaden your mind in terms of languages, then maybe you're also interested in exploring the world a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely connected. I know when I'm abroad and I'm in a country where I don't speak the language, I find that super frustrating. It's one of the main reasons why I started learning language. I go to a country, maybe like earlier on in my life with my parents, we would go on holiday somewhere, and I would be there, like in Portugal or in Spain or wherever, and if I don't understand these people and I can't read anything, I get super frustrated. So I really want to learn that. But it also helps, when you're abroad and you know the language, and it just makes you feel good that you can speak with these people. You can connect with them more easily.
I think it's amazing. Yeah, it's an amazing tool to. You feel good about yourself. Also, it's kind of a personal achievement.
Of course,
but it's vanity to a certain point as well. But I feel like the look on people's face when you're clearly not from the place. And you can sort of communicate, that's just amazing. And it gives some really unique experiences I've found that just cannot be replicated if you didn't speak the language.
No, and it just is. It's also interesting, I think. Yeah, you grew up in a certain place, most people, and then you know more or less like how people think, or you have like the same, not exactly the same ideas, but there's something about like the culture, that's very familiar. Whereas if you go somewhere like abroad, then you can really speak with these people and you see how they live, especially because I don't like doing city trips that much, like very short trips. I prefer staying somewhere for a longer period of time, a couple of weeks or months, because then you really see how these people live and you get to understand the culture. And then, it's really interesting, just eye-opening, how different people's outlook on life are as well. So
I definitely agree with that. So how are you balancing the whole, traveling, being a very keen traveler, enjoying being abroad, but also having some kind of balance in your life with some kind of stable element so you don't go completely crazy living out of Airbnbs all the time?
Yeah, so normally I try to stay for a longer period of time. So I really take out like a lease on a place. Mm-hmm. So I just rent something. That I did for a long time. So I stayed in Nice for almost a year. I was in Berlin for a couple of months. I lived in Turin, so when I was in Italy for a year and a half in the same place. Mm-hmm. And I travel in between a little bit, but I try to stay like in one place. Now I moved back to Belgium. I'm back in Antwerp now. So I have my stable like apartment here, like some sort of home base, but it is difficult. When I come back here and now I'm back here actually after living abroad for a couple of years, of course it's difficult to fit in and to stay. And yeah, that's not always easy. I mean, I think you have that experience too. You went to
Oh yeah,
Budapest.
exactly. Yeah, for sure.
It's not always easy to go back to where you were. So
No.
yeah, I feel the travel bug still. I'd like to go abroad sometime soon.
But you went back to your home area, your hometown. You didn't go to you didn't go to Brussels or another huge city.
I went back to Antwerp actually because I still had an apartment there, so I'm there. I've thought about going to Brussels because I mean then I could practice my French first of all, and it would be a little bit. I mean, it would still be in Belgium, but it would be a totally different city.
Yeah,
and it's a totally different culture as well because it's French. I mean, mainly French speaking, although it's supposed to be bilingual. It's just a very different feeling than when you're in Antwerp or in Brussels. It's like completely different.
right.
So I've thought about it actually to move
I was quite surprised when you said that it's a bit of a myth that Belgians are quite the national polyglots. I genuinely thought that everyone in Belgium spoke like 3 languages on average.
If you're in Brussels, of course, most people are bilingual. Most people would speak Dutch and probably some English too. If you're in Antwerp, not so much. People would speak a little bit of French, but most people don't like it at all. It's like one of the most hated subjects in school, French.
Yeah, that's quite common, I think, for a lot of places, not just Belgium.
Yeah, of course. It's just very, very divided, and this is something that many people don't understand. Very divided. So there is language frontier actually, like a language border, a bit south of Brussels.
But it's not recognized. How does that work? Like,
no,
to make this
let's not talk a little too much about this.
No, not too much.
But there is a border. So it's actually an official frontier that's like official right through Belgium. It's not a border like another country, but north of this line or this border, Flemish or Dutch is the official language. South French is the official language. Then you have a small part in the east where German is the official language, and then Brussels is officially bilingual.
But what if I live in Antwerp and I'm a French speaker? Can I not call the local government and get help in French?
No, probably not. I mean, they don't have to help you. They might help you, but
they don't have to.
They don't have to help you in French. No, they don't have to.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
Language is Dutch. Yeah.
See, that's less progressive than I had imagined. I would imagine it like Wales and England or Canada, maybe. We have very bilingual status in many places.
It's governments fall over this in Belgium. It's very, very sensitive stuff.
Okay, well, let's quickly step away from the hot political topics. We love methods here on the podcast. And when I say I mean me. I really love methods and what people do. So the nitty gritty, or maybe some of the recipes to language learning success. And you kind of mentioned earlier that one of your inspirations for starting your own company and doing these courses and content was that there were some things that you felt was quite frustrating where you'd come up with your own kind of ways of doing it. Can you give us some examples of some of these things that you found were just hopeless in classic wisdom and that you improved on?
Of course, yeah. So the method that I developed, I recently started calling it the Effortless Conversations method because it's very much focused on being able to speak effortlessly, So not that much on writing and being completely like correct grammar-wise, but more about having words roll off the tongue when you try to speak. And I feel that most language schools and even at university, they're not really preparing you for actual speaking. So what most schools do, and what also university we have to do all the time, is they give you a lot of word lists to learn. So a lot of isolated words. So you need to memorize all these words.
Yeah.
For example, memorize 2,000 most frequent words, or 5,000 or whatever. And then you have to learn a lot of grammar rules. And then the thinking is, or at least that's how it feels to most people, is, okay, so I learned the words, I learned the grammar rules, and then I have all the ingredients, and then I try to string, together sentences with these words and these grammar rules.
Yeah.
Which is super difficult. It's super slow whenever you try to speak and you have to think of the grammar rules. You're never fast enough. People get all frustrated and tongue-tied, and it just doesn't work well, and everyone knows that feeling of being super clumsy and being too slow and not knowing how to say stuff. And that's something that frustrated me so much also at university because we still had to do it there. And I remember the way to do exercises like for German linguistics class where we had to translate a sentence from Dutch into German. It was something like, the vicar fled the crime scene on his bike, fell over and ended like in a pond or something like that. It would always be super weird sentences that you would never ever hear in real life, and we had to translate them. And then of course we were all like just guessing, because like, what do we know how to say that? Well, we're just guessing, gambling. Let's try to get them some words and try to follow grammar rules, and then hopefully this is a sentence that sounds more or less natural to Germans. And honestly, what do I know if my sentence is correct if I make something like that? If you're a language learner, if you only rely on grammar rules and isolated words, you never know if your sentence is correct. You could ask a native speaker, and then they will say, either would say, okay, yeah, it sounds natural to me, I would do that too. Or they would say something like, okay, I understand you, but I wouldn't really say it that way. Or sometimes they just say, well, this is complete nonsense, right? And you never
yeah.
I mean, it happens, and you never really know if you're saying something correct, and you're always guessing. And is this guessing and this trying to reinvent a language? That's always frustrated me a lot when I was learning a language. And I remember when I was doing a master's in interpretation, there was one interpreter, actually, a professor I had back then, who did it a little bit differently, and that's actually what triggered everything for me. So what he said was, well, guys, you don't have to reinvent a language. It's already out there. People are using it every single day. So just observe native speakers, just listen to dialogues, just read a lot, and then see for yourself how native speakers say stuff. So don't think about a language as a programming language. Don't start from words and grammar rules. Start from the language as a living thing, and don't worry too much about the grammar. Just read, listen, and then look for everything where you say, or when you read something, you listen to something, and say, so this is how a native speaker would say it. This is how a native speaker would react in a specific situation. So all these phrases, all these word combinations, all these expressions that you see in there, where you think, okay, I could have said this myself, but only in a clumsy way, and now I see, like, in front of me, or I hear right now, how to actually say this. If you do it that way, then you're not guessing anymore, because you start from observing. And that made a really big difference for me, because when you start doing that, you just see the language, you observe, you notice how you say things. You don't try to invent it. You don't try to rely on grammar rules. You actually notice. You see how to say things. If you try to memorize that without thinking too much about the grammar, then it will start rolling off the tongue, because you don't have to think about grammar anymore. Also, the same is true for, case system, for example, in German. I mean, you can learn all the rules of after this preposition, you have to use a dative or an accusative or something like that. But you'll always struggle with using that rule until it becomes automatic, until it becomes like a chunk somewhere in your head, like an automatic thing in your head that just rolls off the tongue. And it's this observer mindset, like I call this the power of observation instead of invention, of like constructing the language. Makes a huge difference in your confidence. And it is based on that idea that I developed my own method for language learning. I've already taught that to thousands of people already. I'm using it in my language courses as well. Works really well to refine your language, like your language skills, your speaking skills, and to have words roll off the tongue. And it's all actually based on the idea of chunking. I don't know if there's many linguists among your audience, but it's based on the lexical approach, basically. So, and that actually means that, in your mother tongue, you don't think about grammar rules all the time either, right? You just have word combinations ready in your brain. You have words, that are often used together, collocations, phrases, prepositions that go with certain you've used them together so often in your mother tongue, and you've heard them so often that you don't think about them as like a separate thing anymore. Just like something that rolls off the tongue while speaking, like, for example, in English, call an election, or I guess so. You would like a tag question, isn't it? You would say something like a golden opportunity, or say like happy birthday, happy Christmas, Merry Christmas. All these things just roll off the tongue in a conversation. The same is true in other languages, like German, as I said before, even stuff like conjugations in French or Spanish or Italian. All these things, native speakers don't have to think about them, because it's become a chunk. They don't think about a conjugation table, they just speak. And it should be the same way for you if you want to speak effortlessly. So that's basically the method.
I think a lot of people know, or at least if they follow, kind of the new approach, I don't know if we can call it that, but like the wave I see it as current, let's say, influences in the language learning world. It goes all the way back to Michel Thomas, I guess. It's about whole sentences. It's about learning to converse in the language, not necessarily learning every word, every case, every grammar rule, like you say. But I guess the problem is for a lot of people, myself included, is how do we go about doing that without a teacher that uses the same method? Because it's easy enough to know that, oh, you need to do this and this, but sometimes I'm not sure how to actually put that into practice. Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, okay. So I do actually. This is actually the method that I teach. And how I see it, if you do this, if you think about it like as a framework, like a sort of theory of language acquisition, how I see it is what you do is you start with input. You need to get a lot of input. So if you want to do this, of course, you need to observe a lot. So you need to read and listen a lot, preferably dialogues, like native speaker dialogues. First step, of course. And the second step, you try to identify these chunks. And this is actually because, I mean, the lexical approach, as I said before, and this chunking method, it's been around for almost 30 years, I think, or 25 years. But it's mainly used like to show teachers how to teach a language, and not really, it didn't really show like the mindset to language learners that much. That's what I think it failed a little bit, because the real power of this comes exactly from having this mindset of looking for chunks and reading and listening all the time and thinking all the time, could I say this myself in exactly the same way, in like a natural way like that? Or do I have some sort of clumsy language hacker equivalent in my head, something translated from my mother tongue? Or every time you think, so this is how you would say this in my target language. This is how a native speaker would say it. And I do this all the time. So when I start learning a language, I just start with dialogues with Asimil, for example, or recently started creating our own dialogues in my company. So we have dialogues there as well, native speaker dialogues, and I just read through them. I read the translation maybe as well, and try to find all these word combinations, all these phrases, all these things where I say, okay, I could never have said it myself that way, but I understand what's written here, and I know that I want to be able to say this myself. I'm thinking of a good example now.
I feel like the more different the language as well, the more sort of dramatic these, I guess you'd call them like semantic expressions. Because you're saying the same thing, but a native speaker would say it in one way, and if you only knew the words and the grammar rules, you'd almost certainly say it a different way. Especially for the more complicated the languages, I feel like, or the more distant it is from your native language, the harder it is, I think, for a learner to actually create naturally sentences that mimic what a native speaker would say.
Exactly. It's very difficult to create that yourself. And there's often these small words or these small prepositions or stuff like that come in between that you can only know by observing, by reading and listening, you know. Anyway, so that's the second step, that you need to train this mindset of observation mindset, try to identify these chunks for yourself. And just by doing that and by looking out for them, you will notice already, because you always have this, you know, I call it an aha moment. Like often when I read something or listen to something, it's really like, okay, so this is how you should say it. And then when you have that, and you'll know when you have it, when you start doing this, you'll start noticing these things. That already helps in memorizing, of course. But what I normally do is afterwards, I would make a flashcard out of that. You know, like many people use spaced repetition flashcards like Anki. I usually make a close card. So I would just type a full sentence, and then I would blank out the chunk. So not one word, like the full chunk. And
then that's cool.
The translation there, you know, like and that's like the memorization step that, I mean, you probably need, unless you use other methods like memory palaces or imagery or gold list methods. You could probably use that as well to do this. You need to memorize it in some way. There need to be some sort of memorization step involved, because otherwise you will forget everything, you know?
Yeah.
And then in the final step, of course, you just need to implement. So you'll notice when you do this and you start learning these chunks, they will actually roll off the tongue in conversation.
Yeah, they really do, yeah.
Yeah, I see people in my language courses, they're telling me all the time, like after they do this for a couple of weeks or months in the course, they say, okay, I had a conversation today, and well, I had this chunk that just rolled off the tongue. And afterwards I was like, oh, I just said this chunk that I just observed like a couple of weeks ago. And they would really say that to me. And they also say, once you start training this mindset, that you start seeing chunks everywhere. So they really you start seeing them everywhere. And it made such a big difference for me when I was learning Italian, for example. I used this method like to learn Italian from scratch a year and a half ago. It worked so well. I got conversational really, really quickly. And that's actually why I started teaching this to other people too. And now it works great for them too. So I'm more and more confident that this is really the way to go if you want to learn a language, you know.
Yeah, I don't know about you. Do you sometimes feel guilty for saying some of these chunks? Because I maybe I'm just being weird, but I literally remember fixed chunks from German in 5th grade. I remember the teacher saying like "meiner Meinung nach" or "nach meiner Meinung," and I just every time I said it, I would just remember back to that class, and I was like, "That's really paid off." And with Russian, that's the most recent language I've been learning. I just get all these like say the same things all the time, basically. But I think what I've realized is that's what native speakers do as well.
Of course,
like they really use the same fixed expressions all the time. It's just a funny reaction. I'm like, I sort of sometimes feel like I feel a little bit guilty, like I'm like rehashing something instead of speaking.
Yeah, but this is exactly what like many people think. They for some reason in their mother tongue they're fine with using the same words all the time. I mean, everyone has their words and like their expressions that they're all using all the time, right? And then sometimes people make fun of, like your friends would make fun of you because you always say like a certain thing.
Yeah, of course.
And you don't notice because you're not really that actively looking for chunks or listening to the language, I think, in your mother tongue. But you use the same expressions all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
And then when you're using another language, like a language you're learning, all of a sudden you need to be creative and you want to be able to say everything.
Mix it up.
And you want to mix it up and you want to apply this special grammar rule that you've learned and oh yeah, now I have to use this. But I think I'm totally fine with just observing, and at least in the beginning, of course. And you know, these chunks are also building blocks. You know, you can still make difficult sentences with that, but starting from a chunk level just makes everything so much easier when you try to speak. And I don't try to be, I just want to be able to express myself. And if I find a way to express my opinion or whatever I want to say by using a chunk that I've just observed by someone else, which is probably better because they will understand you more easily because you're using something that's very natural for them to hear, you know, that just makes it easier for me and for them too. So I just, I don't really feel guilty. I know what you mean. This is something I think that many people feel, like I said before. Yeah. People try to invent a language. They try to create like a whole language because they feel, I have learned all these grammar rules and I've learned the words. Just not how it works, according to me, at least.
No.
Hey guys, just taking a quick break from the episode to talk to you about this show's sponsor, which is Glossika. I'm super excited to have Glossika on board, a really reputable and trusted language course producer. They're producing courses in many, many languages. I think they're over 50 to choose from at the moment, and you get access to all of them with a single subscription. And if you want to give it a try, you can go to tryglossica.com in one word. And get started for free, see if it's anything for you. What I really like about Glossika is the hands-off approach to the learning. So they give you a certain number of repetitions you need to do every day. And each sentence in those repetitions has some grammar elements that will mean that you slowly understand the language in context. And you build a repertoire of sentences that you can sort of refer to when you get a similar pattern of sentence in the future. So that's really cool, and there's some other language learning tools you can use on Glossika. They have a few different games, a few different ways of revising. That's not just the main reps, but that's by far my favorite feature, that you can just kind of sit back, let the software do the repetition for you, and then do one segment a day. You know, it takes like 15 minutes, maybe half an hour if you want to do a little bit extra, and you're well on your way to rapid progress. So go to tryglossica.com, give it a try, say how much you like them for sponsoring the show, and hopefully they'll bring us, they'll come back for the next season.
Oh, and it's funny, we put these ridiculous constraints on ourselves. And I think also this comes back to the idea of perfectionism. I think it's part of it that people are just, like I saw a Reddit thread today. There's a language learning subreddit that's reasonably active. I sometimes browse a bit there, see what's going on. And today somebody was frustrated that they couldn't roll their R's after a year of learning Spanish. And as someone who still can't do it after, I mean, I haven't seriously learned any language with a rolled R, unless you count Russian, which I think they're quite forgiving if you don't do it, but some people do, obviously. I've taken like years, I still don't know how to do it. I feel like I can do it some of the time and, you know, a little bit inconsistently. But it's just beating yourself up, isn't it? After a year, there are loads of native speakers who can't roll the R that don't do it. So why are we putting such a pressure on ourselves? I mean, that's more of a philosophical question, really. Not necessarily specific to the chunks.
No, it's more about language learning in general, right? It's people want to be perfect, speak perfect, without any grammatical mistakes. Whereas if you look at native speakers, they're making mistakes all the time.
Yeah,
I mean, Germans make mistakes against the case, or they don't even know the rules for the cases. No? If you ask them why do you use a dati, they're like, I don't know, because they learn it as a chunk, of course. But it's in all languages. French, if you chat with native French speakers, I don't understand anything. One of my French friends write me something that's full of mistakes.
Yeah,
it's just crazy. And then also when people speak, when I speak my mother, I know like I'm making mistakes when I speak. Okay, I speak Antwerp dialect a little bit with my friends, but then there's so many mistakes in there still, and people are making mistakes all the time against all these basic things that you feel bad about as a language learner, you know.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I hope that we can spread some awareness on that front. I know I'm quite bad at it myself, but the chunking definitely works, and I would say with languages like German or Russian that are case-based languages, it's just invaluable to have a sentence memorized because the case is the case is part of the chunk. You don't have to think like, okay, that's genitive, and you visualize like a table, and by the time you got the right ending, people have walked off.
Yeah, exactly. It just doesn't work that way.
It's so much better just to have the case. But I actually did that with German as well. If people ask me about German tips, not that my German is great, but something that I didn't do when I was growing up because the teachers didn't tell me about it. I didn't know, but they never encouraged us to learn the gender as part of the word. So they would put a German word on the board, and they would, they might have put the Adidas in front. I can't really remember, but there would definitely be a super big focus on the word itself and the translation of the word. So instead of learning like das Auto, you'd be learning Auto. Auto means car. Okay, great. And then 20 years later, you're like,
that's not useful at all.
You might as well learn it when you're learning the word. So I would really encourage people, if you have a resource that uses some kind of color coding or some kind of asterisk system or something, just mentally think about that because that will help you later. Yeah. Of course, German cases are completely obsolete, aren't they? Anyway, if you speak the wrong case in German, we have at work we have a German warehouse, and I write to them in German, and I'm sure I'm using like half the wrong cases all the time, and they've never like sent an email back saying we have no idea what you're saying. Whereas I think the Slavic languages are a little bit. Sometimes you can literally say the opposite thing, which is it's kind of funny. You can do that in German also, but it's much harder to be misunderstood. And that's another thing, right? Like if you're learning German, is it more important to get the case ending exactly right or to be understood?
Yeah, of course, it's to be understood. But I mean, if you learn chunks, you don't even have to get the case ending wrong.
Exactly.
You don't have to think about it anymore. I think if you try to speak German, I've done that because I studied German for 4 years at university. And we all did, and we were all, even in our interpretation, like we're all master students in interpretation. We couldn't string together a single sentence that sounded natural, and we were so slow. It was horrible. All of us. We couldn't speak. It was crazy. We were just sitting there, and our teacher would look at us like, "Well, what are you doing here?" Because we were trying to, we learned all these grammar rules, and we're trying to apply this case system. You can't do that. You can't speak German when you have to think of the rules, when you have to think of the case and the case ending. You can't do that. And you can either learn the case system and then try to do it in your head all the time and struggle for years until you get so much exposure that you create, like your brain creates these chunks automatically after a while, right?
Yeah.
So or you can just learn them from the very beginning, or you can also choose not to bother with them at all, of course. And then this all depends on what you want, of course. If you just want to be able to make yourself understood, of course, just mumble a little bit when you speak German, so they don't even hear which ending you're using.
Yeah,
you can totally.
But I think it's an important point, especially for people, I think, who are new to learning languages. This was kind of a revelation for me a couple of years ago. I was trying to, I don't know if you've ever done this, and if people listening have done this, please let me know, just so I know I'm not crazy. But when I was getting a little bit decent at Russian, but like into the beginner level, of course, not anywhere near the high levels. If I was writing with a Russian person in Russian, I would type up my answer, whatever, then I would copy paste it into Google Translate. And if Google Translate didn't flag any of the words as like, did you mean, I would be like, okay, that's good enough, which is completely ridiculous on so many levels.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like a good strategy at all.
No, and that's why I'm presenting it as, this is my terrible past. It's like the ghosts of language learners' past. No, but it's the same idea where I could just type it up and I could just send it. And if people don't understand what you mean, they generally respond with, what do you mean by that? Or question mark, or sorry, I don't understand. Can you say it again in another way, maybe? It's not like the world ends because you said a sentence that people didn't understand. And I really think that what held me back in the beginning from learning Russian was I was just terrified of making mistakes. And I think it's the same concept here, where if I'd focused on making chunks or learning parts of the language instead of just learning words and grammar rules, I wouldn't need to have that worry, because it's just either you have the chunk or you don't. Like, you wouldn't have parts of it. So I think that is definitely something that I stand behind 100%.
Yeah, it takes away a lot of overwhelm, a lot of mental stress as well. You don't have to think that much anymore. You don't have to think about the grammar rules. You just speak, and either you know the chunk exactly or you don't know the chunk. And if you don't know the chunk, of course, you need to have coping mechanism. You need to be able to make yourself understood in some way, which everyone can do. And you will still make mistakes, because so often that you don't know the chunk, or that you don't know the word even, and you need to be able to work your way around that. But I think it's also, it all depends on what you want when you learn a language. I know there's people who just learn a language because they're going on holiday, they want to say a couple of phrases, a couple of sentences. Even then it's still useful to learn chunks, but you don't have to. If you really want to get to a high level, I think it's mandatory. Everyone needs to do it, because at least if you want to get to a high level quickly. But if you just want to learn a little bit, if you're like more into language hacking, you just want to learn a little bit, then you just need to get over your fear of speaking. Just make mistakes and speak.
Yeah. Well, I guess
people understand most of the time.
Yeah, getting over your fear is, I guess, that's a general life.
That's the biggest thing. Right?
Life tip, not just languages.
And I feel it's something that comes back with every language. Every time you learn a new language, you have that fear of speaking again, and then you think, okay, now I'm over it. It's my fifth language. And then you start speaking. It's like, oh no, I'm so scared. I don't want to
feel like an idiot. Yeah, completely idiot.
Yeah. It only goes away. I mean,
confidence is such a big part of speaking. If you have the confidence, you can almost always talk yourself out of a gap in your language knowledge. Absolutely. But if you're really not sure, then it's so tough, and you also slack up on the pronunciation, so you're even harder to understand. Like, it's almost like, what's a good analogy here? Like maybe golf. Like if you start the swing really well, but then halfway you kind of hesitate, it's going to be terrible, because you don't get the follow through on it. But if you really whack it and just keep that club going after you've hit the ball, then it's just going to be so much better. And I think for me that's a big problem. I don't know what it is actually. I don't know if it's a general shyness or anxiety or some kind of mild autism or something. But it's just when I speak to strangers, and especially foreign languages, I'm like, it's almost like I'm dying. It's so scary. Every Skype call I'm dreading, but afterwards it's amazing. So I don't know how that works. Not to turn this into like language therapy or anything, but I'm sure a lot of people have similar issues out there.
I think many people have similar issues. I have the same. I don't feel like dying necessarily, but I get quite some anxiety when I do that too, just because I think there's many things at play here. First of all, if you're more introverted anyway, and you usually like weigh your words and you think a lot about what you say, that makes it more difficult to speak a language. Whereas people who are super outgoing and just speak their mind all the time, they might have, some people still have difficulties, but many people just don't care that much anymore. It's one thing. Another thing is definitely identity. Plays a big role in there, I think. You need to make all these weird sounds with your mouth that you're not used to. And these muscles are not used to it. And then you feel super weird when you talk in that language and you don't know what to say. You want to be interesting.
Do you ever feel like you're impersonating someone when you're speaking a foreign language?
Yeah, it's not necessarily that I feel like I'm impersonating someone, but it's just that the moment you start speaking the language, something changes. And it's not only the words, but it's also like the expression and the things you say,
and the way you move.
Yeah, the way you move. Definitely in Italian, that's a big thing. So you always use gestures, and it's super. I mean, you can't speak it without making any gestures, which was weird in the beginning. I remember when I was there, and I don't usually like use a lot of gestures when I speak in any language, but in Italian, it's almost
you have to.
You have to. Yeah. So I tried. I was like learning a little bit, but then I would often do something that looked super weird to them when I was just making like a gesture, wasn't thinking about a gesture, and they would look at me like, "Lucas, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Yeah, just talking."
It's like two languages at once, like a spoken and a sign language at once.
Yeah, I would just do my hands, and they would be like, "Lucas, that looks super weird." I'm like, "Well, I don't know." Yeah, so impersonating, definitely, it's not. I mean, you can do that. I think it can actually help in the beginning if you start learning a language, especially with like pronunciation, because many people I know are very shy about it's like a big thing.
Yeah,
many people can perfectly pronounce perfect French or Italian. It's not like a physical problem almost for nobody. It's more of a, I mean, and I've noticed that a lot, it's more of, you have to dare to speak that way because you sound pretentious,
Yeah, you took the word right out of my mouth there. That's exactly what I was going to say, especially with French. I think it's very easy.
Yeah, with French, pretentious. Super pretentious, and in Italian, and even in English, if you try to, I mean, I know at least in Belgium, if you try to get like a really good British accent, people will, I mean, not all the time, but in high school, for example, if you do that in class, people would look at you like, what?
I got teased in high school for British accent.
You get teased.
Everyone else was speaking like American accents, and they're watching Friends. And now I don't know what accent to use, so that episode has haunted me ever since. But of course, living in the UK, it's tough to argue using the American accent, unless I want to just be interesting, No, I thought about that also, but because it's easier, it's way easier on the mouth. Like I don't think English native speakers appreciate just how automated their accent is. Because I have to consciously, on almost every word, decide what am I going to do about it. Am I going to speak in an American accent, which is for me, the mouth is quite relaxed, but having been part of a UK society for a while, having watched a lot of UK culture, there are certain words that pop into my language which makes it hard for me to speak with an American accent. For instance, the word American, I feel like I say it in quite a British way, I feel like. The same with the word for water. Like, I just can't get rid of that. There's can't as well. Now I'm hearing it all the time, so enough about that, but I think the idea that we need to, is it because you need to exaggerate a bit in the beginning just to train those muscles to kind of hone the pronunciation? Like, it's better to overdo it to begin with and then scale it back rather than underdo it and then try and scale it up.
Absolutely. I think one exercise that I like to do in the beginning when I start learning a language is shadowing, something that we had to do. I mean, some other people might have talked about it on the podcast. So we had to do that during our interpretation training a lot. So you would listen to a native speaker speak. You put like one headphone in your ear, and then you just repeat what the native speaker says like 1 second later or immediately afterwards. Okay. And you don't try to, you just try to mimic the sounds. You try to mimic the prosody, like the rhythm, everything, just to get used, to making these sounds and using like the intonation that native speakers use.
Is it stuck fully? Useful. Like, do you hear a clip and then say it, or do you say it with the speaker?
I stay with the speaker.
As they're saying it, basically.
Like a little bit afterwards. Yeah, as they're saying, or like a little bit afterwards.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never tried that, actually.
It's really cool. I mean, interpretation exercise actually to train, like to speak and talk at the same time. And also your memory. So you would wait 5 seconds and then you
speak and talk at the same time.
Yeah, you speak, and then, which is quite difficult. But I mean, you get used to that. So it's a good exercise for that too. But also just getting used to the sounds and getting used to pronouncing and making these sounds. And also you get used to the rhythm a little bit more, and it helps later on because then you have the rhythm already and you know what the sentence is supposed to sound like, more or less.
Yeah,
so that's something I like to do. I think it's just difficult speaking another language. Yeah, you just feel embarrassed about it in some way. I think a lot with identity. You have a certain identity of how you speak, your intonation, your mother tongue. All these things are part of your identity. And once you start speaking another language, you have to change your identity or part of your identity, which is super difficult, and it makes you feel pain, you know, and embarrassment. Plus, what other people think of you, of course, plays a big role in there as well.
And it's hard if there's non-speakers of that language around as well, because then you seem like a real idiot. If there's like, you know, you're speaking a foreign language that somebody around you cannot understand, it really seems like you're just being pretentious.
Yeah, and about that identity, actually, I thought of something interesting. Actually, I think you take on like a different identity, impersonating someone if you speak a language, because when I'm in Italy, I can perfectly speak Italian with my friends there, no problem at all. It's fluent, I can have any conversation I want. But when I come back to Belgium, and then someone asks me, I mean, you probably notice, like, hey, everyone else, oh, you speak Italian, speak some Italian to me. I can't do that. And I get like super nervous, like, oh, and it's because you're not used in that situation to take on the identity of an Italian speaker, you know?
Yeah.
So you have that identity, or it's if you speak, you like French, if you always speak French, for example, with someone, you meet someone and you always speak French with them, and then all of a sudden you decide to switch to English.
Yeah.
Super weird, right? You can't do it because you have sort of connection really identity with that person in language.
Yeah, it's really tough as well. Like in my office, we have this Finnish, Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish team, and you know, I've been trying to champion that we should speak like the Finns. The Finns are weird, you know. That's a completely different language. I'm not interested in them. They're nice. They're nice people, but I've been trying to champion that Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian should be sort of preferred among us, because it's so similar. It's ridiculous. It's like speaking, you know, Catalan. Well, I don't know. Actually, I don't speak Catalan, so I don't know if that's a good analogy. But two very similar languages, like Swiss German and German. Yeah, basically. Or I guess, do you have the same with Flemish and Dutch? Maybe is that very similar?
Very, very close. I mean, it's actually the same.
Right.
Same word. So it's like Austrian and
that would be Norwegian and Danish, and I've been trying to champion it, but the thing is, you have this identity when you speak in your own language, which is also a different thing. Like you're very different when you speak your own language compared to any other language. Yeah. And then, you know, you might be joined at a table with an English speaker, and suddenly you're speaking English to the people that you used to speak Danish with. And this happens to some of my Danish friends as well, where if we're just playing games online or something, we're speaking in Danish, and then our friend from Scotland joins, and suddenly we're speaking in English to each other. And you know what? My accent is terrible in that scenario. And I don't know how or why that happens. Because if I go here on the street, sometimes people have a hard time telling me if I'm from here or not. Like they always end up saying, after I've been speaking to them for about 15, 20 minutes, and they're always like, oh yeah, there's a bit of an accent there. I couldn't really place it, but there's a bit of an accent, which, you know, that's fine with me. But if I speak with English with my Danish friends in the same room, it's like just started learning English. I don't know what happens. I'd love to have some kind of. We should have like a language psychologist or someone on the podcast.
I think it's a super interesting phenomenon. It's so weird that you can speak the language with someone like perfectly fine, and then you have to do it with someone else, and all of a sudden you just blank and you.
It's just different, yeah. But you know what? It's because I don't want to. I think in this particular scenario, it's because I don't want to go full English on them, because I mean, they speak English very well, but they're not like fully into it. So I don't want to seem pretentious again. You know, I don't want to seem to be bragging how good my English is. So it's like my body is sabotaging my own
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's interesting. It's some sort of alter ego. At the same time, as I said before, you can use that to your advantage as well. Try to create some sort of alter ego in your head. Maybe find some sort of symbol using, some sort of trigger for yourself that says, okay, now I'm French, or now I'm speaking Italian. You move completely into that persona when you try to speak language, or when you're having a night talk session, or you're just trying to speak with someone. And when you make that conscious shift, that might actually make things easier, because then you separate, you know, these identities a little bit.
Yeah, I tried to do that with German and Russian, like my third and fifth language. But I feel like with English, I have a certificate that says I'm bilingual, so it must be true. But I feel like English is such a big part of me and my life and my culture and who I am, that I don't feel like I'm not putting on any show. I'm not doing Like it's not different to me speaking Danish, which means it's kind of automated. Whereas if I'm speaking Russian or German, I definitely do change. Like my identity definitely changes a lot more. I would hope my identity also changes with English and Danish, but with Russian and German, I definitely put on a different persona, and I think it definitely makes my language skills better. And I would highly recommend people do that as well, because that makes it easier to put on this like real accent instead of being sloppy with every word. Because if you're imagining you're like a native speaker or that you have an alter ego, like you said, it's just so much easier to have a good pronunciation, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we need the psychiatrist or psychologist either way. But one thing I have to bring up that everyone always seems to comment on this, and for a good reason probably, but a lot of the people that I interview are young guys like yourself. Probably because that's kind of that's what I am. So naturally, my friends and network would naturally be in that kind of demographic as well. But what happens sometimes, I think the focus gets removed from the very good language learning advice that we've been talking about in the last hour or so, and it gets taken away because people discredit it to, well, he's 22 and free and can just travel anywhere, has his own company, and lived in a country that has 2 or 3 languages and all these unfair advantages. So what I really wanted to just bring up again is this idea that it doesn't matter how old you are, where you live, or how big your family is, or how demanding your job is. There's always time for language learning, and I'll let you take it from here. But I'll give you a leading question. I don't suppose your language learning success has a lot to do with being 25 and a 25-year-old guy from Belgium.
No, so I mean, everyone can learn a language, of course. It doesn't even matter how old you are. And I think you have an advantage if you're a bit older. If you learn a language, it makes it easier if you can travel, of course. But it's not you don't have to be able to travel to learn a language. There are so many ways with the internet to create like an immersive environment. You can find tutors on italki for every language. And you only have to study maybe 20, 30 minutes a day. Real studying, like do the chunking, for example, do some flashcards. If you can do that for like a prolonged period of time, it's actually one of the pillars of my, my effortless conversation method is stick to it for at least 3 months and do something every single day and make, progress inevitable and make the language part of your day in any way possible. You can listen to podcasts in your target language. You can listen to music. You can try it. Almost everywhere there are meetups for languages, for learning language, where you can practice your languages. You can do all that. And most of the languages I learned, I actually learned in Belgium. Right. And then I went to these countries. Once I already spoke them at like B2 level, maybe. Only Italian I learned in the country, but all the other languages I learned in Belgium while being in Antwerp, while not having much access to native speakers at all, actually. I didn't have access at all to speakers. So it's possible. With regards to age, most people in my language courses are actually 35 until even 75 or 80 years old. From what I've seen, they're super motivated. They're really putting in not like hours of studying a day, but they're doing something consistently in these courses. They're making great progress. They're telling me, my comprehension's improved so much. I'm giving them tools like flashcards, like imagery. Anthony Mettivier's magnetic memory method, for example, is something that works really well no matter how old you are. With imagery, mnemonics, memory palaces. Many of my students have reported success with that too. So yeah, you can learn a language wherever you are, especially with the internet nowadays. It doesn't matter how old you are. There are always ways of studying, of learning. Chunking helps a lot in doing that if you don't like studying grammar, for example. So yeah, what can I say? Of course, I totally agree that I'm in a good position to learn language because I have the freedom to go live abroad. But it's no prerequisite. It's no requirement at all.
No, and actually a lot of the people who write to me on email, I'm really happy to get when I get these nice and long emails about language learning stories and how somebody's used, let's say, learning Spanish or something to really change their life and improve their relationship with their family or grandparents or something. And I often find that a lot of the success stories involve people who are 50 plus. So I think there's something to be said about, I don't know if it's experience or you heard a lot of things in your life so you can kind of, what's important, or if it's some kind of patience you develop. Like obviously there are other hobbies available you could do instead of language learning, but maybe it's just a good time, I guess.
Yeah, I think even if you're at that age, you might, not everyone, but many people have a little bit more time at that age. I feel, at least what I see, like the people in my courses.
Yeah, there might be retired or semi-retired, yeah.
And they're learning for good reasons. It's like to keep their brain active or something like that, which is good. I have quite a lot of people actually who are learning a language because their child, like their daughters, are moved abroad, moved to Germany or so, and then and then they had a grandchild that was born there, and they want to be able to speak in German with them, or like if someone was to Italy, like in Italian, which is a really good reason to learn a language, of course, right? And I feel like, they're willing to implement this stuff and be consistent about it, and that's the biggest difference. It doesn't matter how old you are, if you're going to do something every single day for 3 months or longer, and you don't have these habits, and you do that, no matter how old you are, you're going to make amazing progress, every single one of it. And it's difficult. I know it's difficult. I've given up on learning a couple of languages before. But I know it's possible. And that's like the advantage you have when you learn a couple of languages. I know that I can learn any language in the world as long as I stick to it. Yeah. So I'm not worried about the method anymore. Like I know I can use this chunking method. I know there's stuff like flashcards. And the moment you know that and you start believing that, it's only about staying consistent. And that's something that's not always easy. But if you can do that, anyone can learn a language.
Yeah, and it's learning that first foreign one. I guess that's really the issue, because once that is done, you have the ball rolling.
Exactly. You need to get that belief installed that you can learn language and that you too can do it. That it's not something that other people do because you have like a language gene or you're good with language. It's something that you just need to do and need to stay consistent and get over your fear of speaking and get to a level that's that you like.
It's not magic, certainly. It's not magic.
Not at all. It's just persistence, and it's just something that takes so long that it's difficult for many people to.
Yeah,
for a couple of weeks, and then you feel overwhelmed because you're doing 5 hours of studying a day.
Yeah.
That's why I tell everyone, just do 20, 30 minutes a day. Don't do more than that. Listen a lot, like get a lot of exposure, like have fun with the language. But studying, like with a textbook or with dialogues or whatever, flashcards, even an hour a day is already a lot.
That's a lot, yeah.
I think 20, 30 minutes a day is about right for almost everyone.
Yeah, but I can't figure out if learning languages is actually easy or hard, because it's obviously not, it's not hard in the sense that quantum theory and physics is hard. Like that's really difficult and complicated. But it's quite a feat, it's quite a strength to keep doing something so repeatedly over and over, to like the consistency element is really a challenge.
I think learning a language is it's almost like getting a university degree in terms of like persistence, you
might spend more time on it also.
Yeah, it's crazy how persistent you need to be to learn a language. It's not difficult, like you say. It's not like physics, or there's nobody who doesn't understand, and especially if you learn German, there's nothing to understand. You just observe and you memorize.
Humans are made for language. Like our brain is just hardwired for it. So it's we've got the wiring is in place. So we
exactly. It's just the persistence. That's the only difficult part about learning a language is doing it every single day for such a long time. And that's why I have a lot of respect for everyone who learns a language. I've been doing it for
sure.
tens of years. Even one language, especially 4 or 5 languages. People have done 15 or 20. That's absolutely crazy, I think. Which is not something that most people should aspire to, of course.
No,
but it takes
one at a time. But I like the idea of also that languages for me seem to be rewarding from the beginning. Yeah, so absolutely. You only need to know one sentence to go in to talk to like a waitress or somebody behind the counter, or just a barman or something. You only need one sentence, and they get really happy when you try, and that's your first sentence in the language. That's hour 1, and you're already getting like smiles and maybe even extra help, or you might get a discount or something. I've heard lots of stories about people.
It shows respect as well, I think, they try
For
to
sure,
say
yeah.
something.
I would love to have more of that in Western Europe, but that's kind of like a long dream.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of pressure for immigrants and the immigrant families to speak the local language in many countries, and they have to be this and this good, and they have to do this and this, and there's also like a taboo of speaking the home language. It gets kind of frowned upon, but at the same time, the local population is not really interested in learning any of the foreign language. So in the UK, it's kind of like in London especially, there's so many cultures and languages. If you live in London, I'm sure you have like of course you're going to have maybe there's a Polish what they call deli. You can go in and get some good stuff there. And if you said hi in Polish, how are you, for instance, they would just love you so much. And how long does it take to learn those 10 words? It's just amazing. And I really think society would be better if we had mutual interest in cultures like that. Because the future is very multicultural. Like you're already seeing that everywhere. Like in Brussels, I assume it's the same. It's so multicultural, and there's sometimes it's kind of like a one-way street sometimes. But luckily, there's people like the people listening to this podcast who is interested in sending it the other way as well.
Absolutely, it's just great because it just opens on a whole other world, Also music and listening to all kinds of things, or just reading stuff. If you just learn a little bit of one language and you can understand like the lyrics of a song or like some of the words, it just gives you such a rush, Or if you can overhear a conversation somewhere, you can understand some of the words if you start learning a language. Even that makes you feel so good already. And then you can start a conversation as well, of course, if you want to. That's all great.
Definitely.
And, it can really enrich your life.
Definitely. But anyway, it's been a great pleasure to have you on and talk a little bit of shop. Talk a little bit about the the nitty gritty, I guess, of language learning. It's been a while since we had such a practical episode. So really, really happy you could come on. And by the way, just want to plug what it is you're doing with the Challenges website. If people are interested, they can go to actualfluency.com/Lukas, and that's with a K, as I've been consistently reminded lately. You put that in there, and I'll link to the courses and the blog and everything that we've talked about on the show here. And you can get some more information if you want to maybe join a challenge in the future. And looking forward to seeing how that works out.
Great, Chris. Thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun too. And I hope people find it useful.
I'm sure they will.
listening.
Definitely. Thanks, man.